next guest is truly a selfless Chicagoan who travels around the world helping those in need after life-threatening disasters. Please welcome Claire Liszkay, a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital.
Hi, Claire. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah.
So you are doing God's work. We already know that, but tell us exactly what you do as a disaster nurse, because you're seeing some of the worst in the conditions around the world.
Sure. So I am part of some disaster response teams. So when there is an event, a hurricane, an earthquake, some sort of natural refugee, something happening, I get the call to go, and I do.
Yeah.
Right.
Tell me how you decided to be a nurse in the first place.
Oh gosh, you know, I was actually living in Nicaragua. I wanted to learn Spanish, so that seemed like a thing to do.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And there were just a lot of people there who needed medical care. And I remember thinking, you know, I'm here, how can I help out in this situation? And nursing seemed, I just applied actually on a whim from Nicaragua.
Wow.
And then I got in, so I moved to Chicago.
And what did your mom think of this?
Oh, well, my mom is actually here today.
Proud mama.
Well, my parents are wonderful, and when I called my mom and said, Mom, I'm going to move to Nicaragua, and after college, my mom moved to Paris, and I had just graduated, and she said, well, you know what, Nicaragua is your Paris.
Yeah.
Yes.
Obviously, you deal with some incredibly difficult situations, Ebola outbreaks, earthquakes in Haiti. How do you maintain just normalcy after seeing that?
You know what, I don't know. Sometimes, you know, you see those things and you see those emotions, and sometimes I imagine myself, I'm just going to put that in my back pocket. I'm just going to put that in my back pocket, and we're going to think about that later.
It puts everything in perspective, though, right?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of the places you've been to. Sierra Leone.
Yeah, so I was had the opportunity during the Ebola outbreak in 2014 and to go to Sierra Leone with Partners in Health, and I was part of their Ebola response team. So I worked in, for lack of a better word, a holding center. I was in a rural area on the border of Sierra Leone and Guinea. And so when people started having symptoms of Ebola, so, you know, headache, fever, joint pain, kind of these very non-specific things, they would come to this holding center, which was tarps and tents. And, you know, we'd screen them, and if they looked like they might have Ebola, we'd bring them in, treat them like they had Ebola, and then test them. Right. And then if they ended up being positive, we'd send them to the nearest treatment center, which is about an hour and a half away. And if they were negative, we'd send them home.
Right. And I know that you've been vaccinated and you're taking all the proper precautions when you make these travels overseas, but are you ever worried about anything?
Well, sure.
You know? What worries you?
Yeah, you know, mostly I worry about, I worry about my family. I worry about my husband. With something like Ebola, you know, I knew going into it what the risks were. Yeah. Just like, when you walk out the door, what the risks of the flu are. Okay. I mean, I knew going into them, what I was going to be looking at.
Yeah. Could you imagine yourself doing anything else? It seems like you were born to help other people.
Oh gosh, no. I think, so I applied to be a nurse on a little bit of a whim, but somehow I fell into the best possible career I could have found.
Yeah. What's been your most memorable moment, let's just say, over the last decade?
Gosh, something that always strikes me is how kind people are when they find themselves in these situations. I was in North Carolina last year when Hurricane Florence hit, and I remember standing outside the shelter, the hurricane shelter, and there were people driving up in their cars full of food and water and all sorts of supplies. And I remember thinking, their homes were probably destroyed too.
Right.
But they're just thinking of their neighbors.
Right. I think about in natural disasters or after 9/11 how our country pulled together, and you just wonder, why can't we do that all the time?
Yeah.
Doesn't that cross your mind?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question. So how many months, hours, days are you away from your husband?
Oh, I know. Well, my husband, Miguel, is wonderful. He's so very supportive. And the thing that's really neat about this world these days is that we're connected. So, we Skype, we do the internet. In Sierra Leone, we didn't have the internet, actually, so we use calling cards. We'd call. Now, I had 12 minutes on a card, so that's
you
what
made
I
it work.
Wow.
Yeah. How can people help? How can people help?
Oh, well, the thing about disaster response is you don't have to go very far to do it. Illinois actually has a disaster response team, if you're interested, you can go to the illinois.gov. The Red Cross is a really good place to start. They have volunteer opportunities around the country and around the city, actually. And if disaster response is something that you're really interested in doing, you don't actually have to be a nurse. There are a lot of skills that are needed. And what I did actually is when I was watching the news and I saw, things were happening, I saw what aid groups were there, and I went on their websites and I applied.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story and inspiring us to get involved. And for more
thank you.
information about Claire Liszkay's story, please go to our Facebook page.